All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome here to our informational meeting about the referendum. So thank you again for joining us. This is the first of many opportunities you'll have to learn more about the referendum. I hope you've all read the referendum options report, and I hope that you will complete the survey if you have not already. So we're asking residents to consider an investment in our community on the November 5th ballot that will raise the village's taxing authority. As trustees and village staff, we don't make this request without a lot of consideration and analysis. We began this process in earnest approximately March 1st with a series of subcommittee meetings and full board of trustee meetings. Staff have worked endlessly to educate us, to revise and refine the requests that we have and the math behind the requests. You may recall that we went to referendum 5 years ago. That referendum was in 2020, and the board was unanimous in their recommendation for an $862,000 increase. This is my daughter who had her first day of work today at her job. So I'm happy for her, but not interested in learning about it now. So again, the board in 2020 was unanimous. The board this time is not unanimous. We've had a lot of debates. We've had a lot of meetings. We've had a lot of emails, a lot of conversations. I would say we do all agree on option one, which is maintaining essential services. And on this option, I believe the answer is clear. We need to maintain the same great level of service and great work that our staff provides us on a daily, weekly, and annual basis. So that option, I believe, is before us, and that has been refined extensively by staff to get that number down to the lowest number is to be sustainable. Option two adds and replaces an administrative position and adds 2,000 hours of public service work. Option three includes options 1 and 2 and adds 2 full-time police officers and adds funding for on-call pay and educational incentives for our fire department. Again, as a board, we're not unanimous in the conclusion of additional staff members found in option 2, and we're not unanimous in our need for 2 additional police officers. The police officer question is complicated and safety is costly. Both those options are costly to us. We can talk about this topic all night. We can talk about it for days and hours beyond this meeting. Again, I'd ask you to refer to the documents provided, and then Tanner on our website. Some of you had some other trustees had questions that have now been answered. I will say this with respect to policing. We've heard from our chief of police, Tanner. We've heard from our assistant chief of police, Jay Sudgen, that are very clear in their determination that it's in large part a safety concern for them when they're policing. It's also a consideration that we have had more police calls. We can talk about data all we want, but we have had more police calls. There is the activity is really centered on Sherman Avenue. You know, people who live on Sherman are our residents just like we are, whether we live there or not. The 101, I think, arrests last year, 23. Thankfully, none of them were us. They were not residents of Maple Bluff. So that's important to note. But when I hear from staff, and I hear from our chief of police and our assistant chief of police, and I also heard from our former judge Vogel about the risks that our police endure and the world we live in, I'm compelled that adding 2 police officers is something that we should consider. I'm supportive of that, and you'll have to decide for yourself based on your reading. Lastly, ideally, we would ask 3 questions. We'd ask the questions just as we have them, option 1, option 2, option 3. We'd ask those questions at the referendum on November 5th, and we'd ask them that way. We debated those questions forward and back for months, and unfortunately, we were only allowed to ask one question. And so that's why we have asked, we've sent out the referendum report, and we've asked for you to reply with survey, so we have some indication of the question we'll ask. And so lastly, Mark is going to lead us through this conversation along with Sarah and Tanner, and we're going to try to stick to a diligent timeline, and I'm confident we can. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I am Mark. My name is Mark Rockers. I've been a planner and a zoning professional working serially for the village for the last 15 to 20 years and elsewhere as a consultant. And I'm here to help keep us on schedule and on track this evening, mostly. I'm joined by Nick Johnson, who's also a planner in our massive firm, 3 people. And he's going to help manage the Zoom room. So if you're on Zoom, you're interacting with Nick and keep notes. And I know we're also recording the Zoom, so the recording will also be made available. If anyone has technical problems hearing me in the room or hearing me on the Zoom, please raise your hand, virtual or otherwise, and we'll try to get that taken care of. I did want to take a little bit of time to allow the people in front of you, other than Nick and Kevin, who you've met already, to introduce themselves. And I know we have a handful of trustees that I'd like you to at least be aware that are in the room and listening tonight as well. So maybe I can start with you, Tanner.
Sure. Hopefully everyone in the room knows who I am. You see my face periodically and hear from me in the newsletter when I'm able to write it. Tanner Nystrom, Village Administrator, Chief of Police. I've been in this position since December of 2019, but I started working for the village as a part-time police officer in early 2012. And I moved into a detective position for the department, and I worked in that capacity as I went to school here at the university for approximately 8 years.
And I'm Sarah Dons. I'm probably not so familiar to all of you because I kind of work in the office more, but I've been with the village since 2013. I'm the deputy administrator, clerk treasurer. Prior to coming here, I worked for the village of Mount Horeb for 15 years.
If I could propose on you, Christine, right in front of me, to introduce yourself as a trustee.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm Christine Yeager. I'm a trustee. I've been a trustee for 8 years. And I'm open always to questions or calls out.
I see Greg and Lindsay and Mike as well.
I know.
I know. You're so tan.
I'm Greg Eagle. I'm in a trustee.
I'm Ellen Myers. I've met most of you. I've been a trustee for years. I'm now chair of Parks and
I'm Jim Schuler. I've been a trustee for 20 years. Mike Woodman, I've been a trustee for 3 years.
Thank you all. And I can tell you there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seats in the front. So feel free to come and sit down. It's going to be a little while here. So I'm going to next just mention the agenda. You've seen it on screen here. We've almost through the orientation number 1. Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about logistics of referenda in Wisconsin, which are important to understand. Tanner's going to provide a little bit of background on who's doing the work here in the village and provide a foundation for moving forward here tonight. Kevin, to the extent he wants to add to it, can talk a little bit more about the board interest and the options moving forward. But the bulk of the meeting will be devoted to describing the options and giving you a chance to ask questions and make comments on the options as you see them here tonight. As Kevin mentioned, our primary tool for getting input is a community survey. If you completed the survey already, thank you very much. You can do so online or by hand survey. We've got about 230 survey responses so far. That's a good start, but we obviously hope to get more. from that. But we're open for questions and comments here certainly tonight and over the course of the next couple of weeks as the board deliberates what to do regarding the fall referendum. You see the red markings on the screen. That's my goal. My primary job here is to keep us on task and focus so we can get out of here. I have us out of here by 6:30. I hope I can deliver on that with your help. In order to accomplish that, again, you're going to hear from village staff on these topics. There is a detailed report. Tanner and Sarah and Chris have promised me they're not going to read word for word in the report, but it is available to all of you in the room. It's available online. For those of you who are participating by Zoom, you can go to the village's webpage right now or later and obtain a copy of that. And Nick's got the general information, but there's a couple of ways on the webpage to get to it. And he may try to track along with the Zoom with the report, but again, our goal is to not go through this report word by word here this evening. It's a resource to you going forward. After each general section, I'm going to start after number 4 on the agenda. We're going to have an opportunity for questions and comments. If you have questions, speak as loud as you can. I'll do my best to repeat them, especially if they're for folks in the Zoom that are not hearing them. And we'll start with questions and comments from the real room here, and then move to questions and comments from the virtual room after that in each round. If you do have comments to make beyond a question, my ask to you is to keep it short if you can, a minute or less. I don't have a shot clock, but if I hear people talking, for quite a bit more than a minute, I'll ask you to wrap it up. Again, there's opportunities for additional comments, written comments. We've gotten a couple already, and we appreciate that. All of those comments that are received over the next couple of weeks up through the survey, which closes on July 20th, will be forwarded to the village board along with the survey results, so they can see not only the results, but any detailed comments you have beyond that. With that, any questions on how this meeting is going to go before we move for the next part? I'm already 2 minutes late. Yes.
What time are you going to be asking people input?
I will wave wildly and let you know it's time, but after number 4, after number 5, after number 6, and after number 7 on the agenda, you'll have time for questions and comments. And we just ask you to keep them focused on, the specific topic that's being discussed at that.
Will there be another opportunity to give opinions after this?
I think the board will need to decide what additional input opportunities, if any, it will offer.
I'm sure we'll have some. Yes.
He says yes.
Yeah.
Right, the meeting said it was 5 to 6 on the website, but now that we're here, it's well past 6.
Well, if you have to leave at 6, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
You can give your opinion on that.
We will do our best to stay on track and on schedule. I think the hope was to keep it to an hour as we got into the number of topics and the number of people. It was basically my call to say, I don't think we're going to be able to get through this all in an hour. If we can, great, we will. But you can blame it on me for extending us out. But I think it's probably going to be necessary to extend a little bit further. Couple more and we're going to move on. Yes, sir.
May I ask a quick omnibus question? You are adding positions into various options. Have you, as a board, have a plan to not need additional referenda to fund those positions year after year? Is that part of the calculation and recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you.
You had time.
Excuse me, I filled out the survey already, but if after today's meeting, I'm like, oh, wait, I wanna change something, can you go back and amend your survey online? To another one?
I would say the answer is no.
Okay.
We'd ask that one survey per person And if you've provided the survey, you've given your response. If technically, it would be very challenging to pluck surveys out of the pile. And, you know, practically, to the extent that we can keep the survey as pure as possible, you know. All right, we're gonna cut forward and Sarah's up next, and I gave Sarah precisely 0 minutes to present her. I'm just kidding.
Which is okay with me. So Kevin touched a little bit on the 2020 referendum, and just take you back a little bit. When we started discussing that referendum, there was a 1-year option and a 5-year option presented. The village board decided to go with a 5-year option that was for $862,409, which resulted in a 34% increase in property taxes. It went to reinstate 1 police position, add a police position. It was for wages and benefits for all staff. Add 1 position to the fire department to cover loss of transportation aid, which is a state aid that we get, that we knew was going to be going down. And then also for operational expenses. The Department of Revenue is the state department that controls levy limit referendum. And so we have to submit wording and calculations to them for their approval before the village board can officially adopt a resolution that essentially gets sent to the county. So in order to meet that timeline, the village board will have to make a decision approving the resolution before August 28th is when that wording needs to be to the county to appear on the November ballot.
You did a great job. So I think we're gonna move forward, and if you have questions about the referendum, I'll give you some time after Tanner presents some additional background information on the village and its services.
Yeah, so I just wanted to walk through the initial pages of the report. So Nick, if you could pull up the report to page 3. And just to give us a little bit of an orientation, why we included some of the information that we, for residents, kind of awareness at the beginning. On page 3 of the report, you'll see that we go through a background about municipal services, and it's not to insult anyone's intelligence, but it isn't lost on us that it's often that people don't know exactly how big each department is and how many staff we have. So as you can see in the breakdown, you know, we have a pretty small, what I would characterize as a pretty small team, 20 full-time staff members, but we are augmented by a significant number of part-time, LTE, seasonal work, volunteers in some cases as well. But the bulk of work is done by the equivalent of 20 individuals, 20 full-time individuals. What I hope comes away from reading through the structural breakdown of each department is that embedded in that is we have a number of different staff who have multiple different duties and responsibilities. Having such a small team, especially in the administration department, requires us to have myself as a dual administrator, chief of police, Sarah as the deputy administrator, clerk, treasurer. You know, Chris is our public safety director, also our fire chief, but he's also integral to all of the email communications and maintaining the website. So there's just little things like that happen on a day-to-day operational basis that make everyone such an integral part and a necessary part to be able to effectively run operations. And to me, that's important because as we talk about, well, why do we need more staff? What's going on? I just want to be clear about what we currently have and the challenges that the size of our team and the scope of work that we're expected to do and they're expected to do creates some challenges for us. And we're trying to address those challenges because they have long-term impacts on the health and welfare of staff. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, retention in my mind means stability. So if we start having friction points, which we've seen, it creates some concern of mine. We have a number of long-standing employees who spend an entire career here, which gives us consistency. But even more so when we start to see turnover at a more rapid rate or turnover those more long-term positions, it leaves that much more for the staff who remain here to shoulder and maintain as we try to train new people and expose new people who come onto the team. So seeing some of those stress factors that I tried to, or seeing some of the stress factors, which we'll get to a little bit later in the report, I just want everyone to be aware on the front end that we did. I had concerns. I talked to staff about those concerns. We tried to address what we could internally from a culture perspective, but we also recognized that there were structural limitations to what we could do. And we wanted to make sure that we're maintaining resident expectations. So one of the things that we did is we came to the village board, staff came to the village board and requested that we bring in a third-party consultant to do an analysis. Specifically, we wanted to do a limited analysis of the administration section, because that's where we see a lot of the overlap in positions and ancillary duties in multiple positions. And so Public Administration Associates did an analysis for us. That actual report itself and our analysis of that report is on the referendum page as well, for your perusal and evaluation. Beyond the municipal services background, the structural breakdown on each department, on page 5, you'll see what we labeled as notable external factors. The intent of this was just to provide a broader context of the challenges facing municipalities across the state. I think it is worthy to note that we're not the only municipality that's facing challenges like this that are a byproduct of many different things. But, you know, a lot of people point to the fact that there's levy limits imposed by a state legislature. And that, you know, that's why we're here today, is in order for us to raise the levy to pay for operational needs. It comes down to the taxpayer and the voter in order to enable us to do so. So our goal today, again, is to my goal for today is to try to help answer as many questions as you all have. The page 6, there's an overview of the village budget and current property tax breakdown. Ultimately, from my standpoint, notable factor is that, you know, 80% of the village budget comes from resident tax dollars, and 71% of our budget is staff wages. So heavily weighted towards when we have a disparity in our wage scales and we're not able to keep up with competitive wages in the geographic area, that's when we start to see people leave. And it creates that turnover that is very, very challenging, especially for our small team. And I'll stop there and allow Kevin to go through
Yeah, we, again, I mentioned this earlier, but we started in earnest March 1 and met at the subcommittee level, met as trustees. We had originally hoped to bring this question to referendum in August, and learned that timeline was probably not going to work, and decided to change it to November 5th. The intent there and the thought there clearly from the board was to get the most number of voters possible to respond to the referendum, and to give the longest possible timeline for voters to make a decision on the referendum. So November 5th was chosen. Again, we debated at length whether, and it was our strong desire to separate it out into the 3 options that we have proposed. And we learned late in our discussion that we were only able to ask one question.
Oh, don't do that. I'm gonna make.
If you're going to referendum for education matters, you can ask multiple questions, but if you're going to referendum, as we are, it's one question. We went through, and Ed, we went through each of the questions at length. Chief Loy led us through a more expansive fire and EMS ask that has been reduced to $77,000. Kind of bare bones. Sarah really led the charge on question 1. And again, the debate on question 1, I think all of us as board members were very supportive of staff salaries. When you look at staff salaries compared to other communities that we can compare ourselves to, they're on the lower end. We certainly think that our staff here does an amazing job for the village, and so we're again supportive of that. There's a lot of kind of like I would call cost of goods in there as well. That's not just inflationary salary. Much more debate on the 2,000 hours for Tom's crew in Public Works. The reality is Tom is doing that work himself right now. And that's been a 20-year thing. That probably really was never the intent. With respect to additional admin staff, we definitely got in the weeds on that topic. Whether that admin staff should be allocated to police or allocated to front of the house. So there was a lot of debate on that. And then on the question of policing, we've had a lot of presentations from Tanner regarding staffing models, how we staff, when crimes occur, what crimes occur, what's changed since 2020. The definition really of proactive policing. So there's been a lot of conversation about that as well. So that's why, again, we really need your engagement to ask questions today, ask questions and continue to ask questions, fill out the survey, and read all the materials provided.
So you've heard questions or information now on the referendum and logistics of doing a referendum for municipalities in Wisconsin. A little bit of background on current village operations and some of the pressures or factors that are affecting municipal budgets here and elsewhere, and some follow-up comments from Kevin. Before we get into the details on option 1, option 2, and option 3, I want to open up the room again for questions and comments on what you've heard so far, and then we'll make sure we get to the Zoom room this time as well. Yes, sir.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is basically we're talking about wages, and you're doing this parity with a bunch of other villages and the city of Madison, and I kind of didn't quite understand the correlation if that's apples and apples or apples and oranges, because you know you're looking at city of Madison, there's 269,000 people. Even the city of or Charlotte, the village of Charlotte is probably the most similar to us. And I mean, they have 950 households with over 2,000 people, where, you know, we're not like that. And I just wasn't sure how that will fit into the equation.
Yeah, and I think the question there was, we compete for the same staff, and our staff would have the same opportunity to work for Shorewood or City of Madison. And so that's where you get into the competitive wage. And while those communities may not be directly comparable to us, they compare from that standpoint.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, before we start talking about option 1, 2, and 3, I just thought it'd be good to level set for people in here. I've been in a lot of the village board meetings for the last 6 months or so, and I know there's enough village board members in here who, as Kevin said, are not in agreement on all the options. But I know they are in agreement that since 2018, there has been no significant increase in crime in Maple, and that is from their own numbers. The only increase that I believe has been captured is in the pursuits and the results of things that happen from the pursuits. Now, I may be wrong in that, but I sat in enough meetings where all these board members talked and said there has been no significant increase in crimes since 2018, and that's their own number.
Yeah, so we'll have an opportunity when you hear about option 3 to question more about that and learn more about that. Other questions or comments in the room here? Yes.
I noticed that there's no option physically as they are to raise our taxes. For example, the public works can do an excellent job, but do we need to have the yard waste picked up every week? Couldn't it be every other week, just like recyclables? That would be a considerable amount of money. You don't have to hire more people.
So just especially since we got the Zoom folks in the room, and thank you for all speaking up. But the question really was, there doesn't seem to be an option that is to do nothing.
Well, not
Right.
raise taxes.
That doesn't involve raising taxes, and I don't know if people can speak to that here on the table.
We did not consider a reduction in service levels.
In the back, yes.
Yeah, so I noted in the documentation, there's 90% turnover in the police department. I guess the question is, do they do exit interviews? Because the transportation is itself But could be there are other factors such as there's so little crime here, it's not a very challenging job, they want to move on.
Question is, are exit interviews done with police officers that leave?
Yeah, and we have done exit interviews, not with all staff. It's a human resource function that we've tried to do better at over time. And I do not have a tallied list of exit interviews from all of the police officers who've come and gone. What I can say is, you know, when I got here in 2019, myself included, we had 5 full-time sworn officers. Coming right into 2020 and COVID, we had a lot of challenges at that time. And we had, we went to referendum, reinstated an older position and then added another position, which made us a total of 7. So part of that turnover during that period of time was trying to hire new people who didn't work out. Another is a significant amount of part-time officers who we had coming and going during that period of time. But it was also our full-time staff. 2, I can think off the top of my head, 2 of our full-time officers went to the city of Madison. And again, there's a multitude of factors why people were leaving our department. I would welcome, and I do think it's worth an exercise at a later date. If people are concerned about why the turnover is so high, to actually reach out to every single one of those individuals, because it's not a long list, right? We have a small team. When we're looking at 90% turnover with all of our part-timers, you're maybe looking at about 15 to 20 individuals that could be reached out to. I would highly suspect, but I don't want to speak for all those individuals. A lot of it, from my perception and knowledge, was 1, pay, career opportunities, growing. And you're absolutely correct. I can think of, we had Sergeant Dabbs, who was also our canine officer for many years. He went to the city of Madison because he wanted to advance his career, and this is where he started his career. Officer Trevor Lee, same thing. He went to the city of Madison for a very similar reason. We did have a couple who didn't work out for varying reasons, and that also contributed to the turnover rates.
Any other questions or comments from the room? Yes, sir. I'm going to hit everyone first before I hit people second. Go right ahead.
Any way to sort of kind of basic level summarize why you're allowed to raise property taxes equal to the rate of inflation plus any growth? And yet inflation is one of the reasons you put forth of why you need more money. Any way to easily explain that dichotomy?
So levy limits restrict us to only net new construction. So when levy limits started in 2005, it was 2% plus net new construction. In 2010, with Act 10, they eliminated that 2%. So you are only allowed to increase your levy by net new construction.
That's true.
I complete the levy limit worksheet every year.
I'm baffled by that because it's. Anyway, so you're saying that in perpetuity, you advance this 100 years, you're still gonna have the same rate per property.
Unless something is done about levy limits. So last year, we were able to increase the levy for operating revenues. Now debt, you can increase it for debt, but for property taxes, for operating expenses, we were able to raise $15,000 for the entire year.
So it's maybe too much information, but I pay about $2 million a year in taxes, property taxes in Madison. And very systematic increase, existing properties increase. You're not doing that?
Oh, we can't do it.
How come they can't?
Well, it depends on what the city of Madison, if they're using their full levy, and it depends on the assessments on your property also.
I would just comment, there's quite a bit of new construction in the city of Madison.
Yeah.
And that contributes to their abilities.
I'm talking about existing buildings, year over year. Get the bill paid, nothing to do with new construction.
I think what you're pointing to is that we can get more resources online and on the webpage to referendum and state levy limits. There's a lot of information and resources available.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else who didn't have a chance to ask a question or make a comment? You're up, sir.
Okay, so there's basically four options, right? Because if the referendum doesn't pass, then we do nothing. And I enjoy the services that we hear. It's one of the reasons I live in this neighborhood. So one of those things, what would we lose? You know, because I think that's something to factor in.
Well, one thing we'd lose is staff. I mean, I don't feel we're being fair to our existing staff, by not, addressing wage inflation. You know, wage inflation is tough when you don't have people who leave. When people leave and you have to replace them, then you have to pay them more. And we've been fortunate with Chris and Sarah, and a lot of our staff, Tom, who've been here a really long time. Tanner's been here since 2019, but, you know, I look at it as, you know, people leave jobs for money. They leave jobs because their boss is terrible, or the job is terrible. And I don't think we have a boss that's terrible here, anywhere on staff. I think fourth probably leave for opportunity or, you know, some other external factor. But as a trustee, I can in good conscience, advocate for a no change. Certainly I question.
So we've had early discussions. Of course, any final decisions would require discussions with the board and likely personnel and finance committee, things like that. But things that immediately come to mind, right? Just as Kevin said, you know, because the levy limit is what it is and our operating costs, and we'll have challenges keeping people based upon our current pay scales. You know, we'd have to look at the potentiality for pay reductions, possibly furloughs, in order to keep the staff that we need or that are critical. Further kind of complicating our retention concerns, but, you know, and then every department would have to kind of look at and see how they can function and operate under that shrinking relative budget, essentially. And you're looking, and, you know, talking with administration, you know, things that immediately come to mind are like limiting office hours or reducing public communications, two things that we spend a good amount of staff time on. Police, I'd need to consider a reduction or elimination of our part-time officer kind of cadre, because that would allow us to keep our full-time officers engaged. That would result in an increase primarily of one officer coverage as opposed to two officer coverage. We would have to consider the positions in the fire department. What is the most lean staffing model that they can continue operations into the future? Recreation, you know, it's a small department, only, you know, Kurt managed that as one component of his job, but it's heavily reliant already on volunteer work. And we'd have to look at how do we kind of reframe some of those things, because volunteerism isn't what it was, you know, 20 years ago. And, you know, increasing of program fees has been something that the board has discussed in the past. It's been considered, and it's probably be another discussion, I assume. In public works, you know, given their workload right now and their burnout rate, I think that, you know, they would look at reducing collections. They would probably look at reducing tree replacements or finding a way to do that a little bit less aggressively, and general maintenance. So those are the ways you'd see it, I think. From a staff perspective, it tightens things down for us even more and complicates our already existing challenges.
Do we have questions or comments from the Zoom, Nick? And now would be a good time, if you have one, you can, you know, raise your hand virtually, ideally. But otherwise you can unmute yourself and.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any at the moment. No hands are raised.
Okay, we'll move forward, but there'll always be that opportunity on Zoom as well here this evening. We've dabbled quite a bit in the options, and you've been teased a little bit on what's in each of these potential options. Second part of the meeting here, we're going to do a deeper dive as to what each option includes. And this is the basis for the survey and that we're asking you about and your input here tonight in particular. So he's talked a lot already, but I'm going to ask Tanner to talk a little bit more in particular about option one, and he needs a buddy. I think Sarah's there.
Sarah's always got my back. I love it. You know, with option one, so starting on page 7, It's a one-page option, so, and this is a lot of Sarah's realm, so I may divert to her, especially if I start to get too technical, I'll get myself in trouble. But you know, the purpose of this one-page document was to try to be as concise as we possibly could to explain inflation and budget shortfall on page 7, and then going into on page 8 and page 9, going into, you know, our recruitment, retention, and wage challenges. You know, at the end of the day, again, it gets technically nuanced, which we will work to put more resources on the website to help explain levy limits and how they're impactful and why they're impactful. But the state imposes that levy limit, and our hands are tied to net new construction for that portion of our tax bill. The village levies that amount, but then any additional monies that we also levy for borrowing. So we also borrow, but borrowed money can't be used for our operating budget. It can only be used for capital expenses. So again, you know, our wages and staff, those are operating costs. They're not capital costs. So that's why it's so, the levy limit restriction is so impactful to our operations. And so, you know, in addition, we've looked at other communities. We had discussions about hiring someone to do a compensation study for us, but also recognize that there were a number of other communities who were doing compensation studies at the same time that we could utilize and not spend that money in hiring. Sarah consolidated staffing studies from a number of different communities and used those, aggregated those findings, made a slight adjustment to as a reasonable measure of inflation if they were done in like 2022, so that they could be comparable and evaluated. And noticed that our wages are not competitive with the average of the geographic area. Now, I understand absolutely there's argumentation that you should benchmark against like size communities, and I understand that argumentation, but one of the challenges from our perspective is attracting and retaining staff who have to travel here into the Madison metropolitan area to work and work in a capacity that's commensurate with, you know, services that people receive in the city of Madison. It's not the same. It's definitely not the same. It's different, but also need to be competitive. From my standpoint, I need to be competitive in order to be able to attract quality people to provide the best services we possibly can for residents. And so we've had difficulty filling vacant positions. We've seen that, we've observed that over the past few years. And we've also observed a good amount of turnover. There's multiple different reasons why that is for each individual. It can vary by individual, but the common denominator for us that we can point to and understand is that the wages, if the wages aren't competitive, it definitely isn't helping us be people. And so I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence and go deeper than that, but I do want to make sure that we have opportunities for your questions and your comments so that we can make sure that we're able to answer them either tonight or at a future date if we need to research.
So Tanner, I had a question before we get started on that. So option 1 actually includes 2 components, right?
It does.
It's the inflation component to kind of catch up with the high inflation over the past few years, and then it's a wage component.
Yes, sir.
So, okay, what other questions do we have in the room here that are focused on option 1?
So I fully support making competitive wages, you know, giving them increases, retaining people. What I'm trying to wrap my head around though is you're at for $530,000 every single year. So we raise the money, the levy passes year 1. People get, based on your figures for the number of staff, it's an average raise of $26,000. What happens next year? You're getting $500,000 in taxes from us. Are people going to be getting a $26,000 raise every single year, or is that money going to be going somewhere else in the budget?
No, I think Sarah might be able to. We got thanks for your comments, Mark. And Sarah looked at your question earlier, and I think that has a better way of explaining it than I would.
Well, sure. So if we pay those wages to employees, we can't then take it back the next year. So we have to keep collecting that $530,000 every year to fund those wages.
But it's not an additional.
It's not an additional
amount each year.
Right.
Right. It's just.
So same amount every year.
Yeah. Yeah, question, comment.
I'm just looking at these current wages, and I understand what you're saying, is that your staff can quit, and they can go work with Madison, but For example, the park and recreation director, I mean, the park and recreation director of the city of Madison or the city of Monona or some of these larger villages and cities obviously have more responsibilities than the park and rec director for our, Camp Ugatamana, which should be run by volunteers. If it's not, then there should be a camp there and people can go pay for it somewhere else. But I mean, it's kind of what Steve was saying. It's like apples to oranges. It's not commensurate with their job duties.
I would say the
some of
parks,
the roles are not equal to a larger area.
Sorry.
I would say you're right, they're not equal, and I would say the Parks and Rec director for the city of Madison. Is probably not cleaning our bathrooms and probably not working. 6 AM to 8 PM or 10 PM like Kurt often does.
They might be.
They might be, but I bet they are.
There's one staff down at the village that should be cleaning the bathrooms. I mean, he shouldn't be doing that. If people are.
I agree 100%, he shouldn't be doing that. I know I'd like to hire more staff so we wouldn't have to.
So I appreciate the comment, and I think there's another side to this too, which can get lost, is why I wanted to make sure we went through like the staff structuring of each department. So Kurt Erickson is our recreation director. He's also our deputy treasurer. He also helps manage all of the IT within this building and for the village. He's a project manager. He helps with municipal services, with water sewer reads, so everyone on village staff, because we have a small team, has a very wide range of responsibilities. And I absolutely agree with you that the parks director for the city of Madison, it can go much deeper than Kurt can when it comes to that, and has a greater need to do so, to have that dedicated focus. But as the deputy treasurer, right now, how do you run a comparison, apples to apples, when you have somebody who's doing 3 jobs?
But I also would add that I've heard you talk about how everybody's juggling up these different things. I think that a lot of people in this room work in small offices where you're doing everything from cleaning the toilets to, hiring staff. That's a job. That's what happens at a workplace. So, I mean, work is work. I mean, I just don't see that as a reason to have to hire another additional administrative support person for $118,000 a year.
Okay, I'll time out because that's option 2.
Okay.
So we'll have a chance to talk about option 2. What we're talking about is option 1, which is the inflation and wage increase for people that are already here, not for any new people.
I will say that I believe that they should be getting a decent increase. I'm just saying to compare their wages to outside agencies, I don't think that's fair.
Sir, in the back. Yes.
Is it possible to get better comps and get that to us? And take away the Madison comps and bring in smaller size buildings, so we can make the businesses see it?
Any response to that?
Well, I don't think there's time for us to go and have someone come and do a comp analysis. However, we do have all of the comps that were done in the other communities, that if someone wanted to do that analysis, they'd be free to do so.
And I'm gonna call another time out in the Zoom. If you're not hearing the questions or the room, please let Nick know, and I'll be sure. I'm trying to repeat them when I think it's necessary, but we've got some loudspeakers in the room. We appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
What would you say is a comparable community if we were going to, would it be Shorewood? Around here?
Yeah, well, for what, so Shorewood Hills, we can look at from a few different angles, and comparable, I'd say that if you're gonna look for something that's most similar to Maple Bluff.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, I can't think of anything closer than Shorewood.
And I mean, I agree that you can't just say Shorewood and Maple Bluff, because you have to compete, but I'm just wondering, like, if we were gonna talk about like what their parks and rec person makes versus,
We had the employment analysis, there were comparables of, they're escaping me, but like around Oconomowoc, there are other communities that weren't, you know, Shorewood's tough because there's so many commercial properties on University. You know, we don't always want to compare ourselves to Monona. The Madison comparison is tough for a lot of reasons. And so then you start, like, I think Wind Point was one down by Racine. There were some other Whitefish Bay, you know, high income communities.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about the numbers on page 9, these are the addition of wages and benefits. Are those numbers determined by basically difference between the blue bar and the brown bar on the graph above? You're just raising the brown bars up to blue bars and then prorating it by the numbers, et cetera.
And I would say that the increases that are being proposed would not necessarily bring all the orange bars up to the blue bars.
No. Actually, I don't think any of them do.
No, I don't, you're right, I don't think they do.
I saw a few hands up. Yes, ma'am.
Are all of these, in the spirit of the apples and oranges debate, are all of these comps inclusive or exclusive of benefits?
Exclusive. They do not include benefits.
Okay, including, just to be clear, including the two, I think it was three analyses that were used to come up with the.
Correct, they were just wages.
Thank you.
So if we're looking at this table on 9 correctly, the bar charts with the blue and the red bars are only wages. And the numbers at the bottom are wages plus benefits.
Correct.
Correct.
That was to itemize that total amount at the bottom for people to understand a little bit more clearly than just one big number. That was the intent.
And that, I mean, remember that number later, everybody's eyes pop out at one administrative support person at $118,000. That's not in salary. That's salary and benefits.
That's still a lot.
We'll get to 2, I promise. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So my other question is listening to staffing. And, you know, I kind of look at maybe Bluff video a little bit differently. The fact that, you know, there are a lot of people that come here, you know, I can't see somebody who's going to be a police officer or, you know, a fireman or something like that. They're coming here things like, I'm staying here forever, because what growth do they have? I mean, there's not a lot of options. So of course, we're going to lose them to, you know, other communities that have more opportunity. You know, you can't become a detective here, you can't become a sergeant here, or it's very unlikely because of that. You know, the people that, how long you might have to wait it out. So the, you know, administrative career positions and losing people who are, you know, in the, you know, kind of more of the workforce. I just don't really quite understand, you know, have we always had that issue? Is that something that's
That issue being, specifically, I heard you bring up emergency services, so police and fire specifically. Well, I'd say this is, there are definitely people who are career progression oriented, who want to advance their career and do a number of other things. So Kyle Dabbs, I think, was a good example. You know, the way that the village kept him around was giving him a canine and allowing him that career advancement opportunity. And it kept him here for an additional 6 years. And that was a good leadership move if to retain an officer who is a real good asset to the community, in my opinion. Now, not everyone, though, what I've found through hiring for culture, individuals who are attracted to our culture here in the smaller team, family, supportive element of having a small team, is that there are individuals who want to work in this environment and for longer periods of time, and not everyone wants to work in a supervisory or in a management or in a leadership position. There's less of them, for sure, but they're impossible to find. One of the advantages, I can speak for our police department, of having a small team and everyone working in close proximity and having a high level of trust and confidence with one another, is that if you have some sort of a personal event that comes up last minute, your family doesn't always suffer as much as it might in a larger organization where you're just expected to come in. Right, like the team bend for each other and look out for each other and support each other, which gives it a lot of that feel, and people appreciate that. So I'm not saying that that's all of it, but what I've found is the officers, well, I'll say this, the police officers that we have right now, I don't see many of them wanting to advance in the near future beyond where they are. They like where they're at. Now that could change over time, and we try to find ways to give them outlets for creativity, growth, and development. Do that through making every single one of our full-time officers a state certified instructor, and we encourage them to go become an instructor and teach in the areas what they're interested in. So for example, Matt Dermanuelian, very interested in like negotiations. So we sent him to negotiations training. He's already had to utilize that not only here in the village, but also to assist when things happen in the immediate proximity to our village.
But is this
Mhm.
the point of attrition where this happens?
Yeah.
And we get that turnover?
Yeah.
Did it happen 10 years ago? Is it gonna happen 10 years now? Whether we, go for option, 1, 2, or 3. I mean, is that going to really change things?
The predicting the market's difficult, right? I can say is the market right now is more difficult than I've ever seen it. When I became a police officer back in 2012, I put myself through the MATC Academy, and I got recruited by Kyle Dabbs to come here as a part-time police officer. I had put myself through the academy, so I was paying my own way through the academy. To fast forward to today, and a lot of people had to do that. You put yourself through school not knowing whether or not you'd have a job as a police officer. Today, it's hard to even get someone into MATC as a hired employee. But but there is no one to recruit from MATC anymore. So while over the years, we have had the opportunity to be able to recruit young people and bring them into law enforcement, expose them to law enforcement with the Maple Bluff Police Department, and then they get hired somewhere else. Typically, that would be in a part-time capacity, but sometimes it was our full-timers. But that's no longer an option available to us just because of the market demands. Now, looking into the future, I hope it gets better. I hope it becomes more, more people want to go into policing, and there's less, more people in jobs, because that benefits everyone, I think, from a quality control standpoint, but I don't know.
I'm gonna take one more question here, and one more question, one more comment, then we're gonna go to the Zoom, and then I'm gonna get us back on schedule. So, yes, ma'am.
I just want to clarify, option 1 is the 261,000 for inflation plus the 535 for the.
That's
the
correct.
totality of option.
That's correct. Yes.
I just have a comment, when we talk about wage comparisons, you're right, the cities listed on that chart are much larger. But we're all competing for the same employee, and they're all having the same cost of living in the Madison metro area. Size wise, we may be more comparable to like an Evansville or a Brooklyn. But we're not necessarily competing with that same worker. So that's just my comment on that. The other thing I would say is that having chaired parks and now public works, I can tell you with great certainty, our staff is doing everything that the city of Monona, that the city of Madison, that the city of Middleton doing. We're all doing the same tasks, like garbage, we're sending DNR reports, we're pushing police data, we're having village meetings. There's sort of like a tipping point with a bigger community where you can have more revenue and kind of spread it out over more people. I understand your pain, like this is painful for all of us. We're a small village that's had these services for, I don't know, almost 100 years. And we're at a point where we just can't get by paying the bare minimum anymore.
We've actually got some chat questions, so we're gonna go to those next. First question is, why is there not an option for just inflation and police?
My viewpoint of that is, this was a iterative process that started a long time ago, and there were many, many discussions at the village board, at the personnel committee, at the finance committee. And unfortunately, we found out after a lot of that exercise that we can only ask one question. And so, from a prioritization standpoint, we had to put this out to the public for input. Based upon priority, and also sitting in as village administrator, my number one priority is making sure that we have wages so we can keep good people. Number 2, from my standpoint, is we need additional staff in the front office, and public works labor was something that the village board felt very strongly about, including that too. And there's enough people who disagree with police specifically, but public emergency services, that ended up at the end of the priority list. Because I will say, like, the Village of Maple Bluff Police Department is gonna continue to provide services, whether or not there's 2 additional officers added. The question, that's not the question, is whether or not we're gonna be able to provide services. So about what type of services you want to provide in the future, but I'll save that for when we talk about question 3.
So the next question on the chat is, why do we have to vote all or nothing? If we were to support 2 out of 3 agenda options, similar question. Oh, it's the same individual. Sorry.
So the survey is designed to just understand public sentiment and support levels so that we can go forward with the best option that's most reasonable to succeed and plan appropriately, because there's a lot of work that has to be done from a planning and budgeting perspective as we go into this. And it would be a tragedy to fail.
So Tanner, maybe just to clarify, the referendum options haven't been set at all.
They have not.
And so the village board is looking for the feedback from the community to essentially prioritize what the community is looking for as far as services go. So tonight is simply just laying out all of our needs, right, in a big picture. Once we receive the survey information, the village board is going to mull that over and then narrow the scope and hopefully come to a conclusion of exactly what's going to be on the referendum before the end of August.
Any other questions from the Zoom? Anyone raising their hand? He's working hard over there.
Oh, one, thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, here's one.
Next question, can you speak briefly to what the municipal court does and how much it costs? For example, it handles fines versus criminal matters, right?
Yes, so municipal court is for municipal citations only. So if it is a criminal charge, and I'm talking way out of my court right now, but those would be referred then to the Dane County Court. So just municipal citations, and our municipal judges here in the audience today. I think you've had 2 court sessions now.
Our newly elected Walt Stewart, thank you.
Yes, we only hear citations that result in forfeitures. Criminal matters are referred to the circuit court. We meet 1 day a month. So it's a fairly small operation.
I think we're gonna move on to option number 2, and I'm probably gonna pose on Tanner again to kick us off on 2. You got your quote?
So option 1 includes $132,000 to restore the reserve funds. How much do we have in reserve? And once that 132 is back, are we just going to continue to add to the reserve? I'm all in favor of having a large reserve, but I just want to know what we're looking at.
At the end of 2023, reserves were I'm just sorry, I'm going off the top of my head because I don't have my paper in front of me. 1.6 million. And then what was earmarked for 2024 brought that down to about $1 million. There were funds in there for Johnson Park, the roof replacements. We had put an insurance check in there, and then HVAC units, fire alarm. There were some smaller things that came out of that. So we're at looking at about $1 million. There is additional expenses coming for the fire truck, which the village board will have to decide whether to use reserve funds to pay for that or to borrow for that. And the 132,000 is similar to the wage adjustment. So we used that 132,000 in our operating expenses for 2024. So we will need to replenish that and then continue to use that each year moving forward in the operating budget.
But it is recurring referendum ask.
Yes.
You can tell them the overflow from the operating budget this fund.
So, sure. So Tanner just asked me to speak a little bit about what happens to excess funds. So at the end of the year, if our expenses are less than what we had budgeted for, any of those excess funds get rolled into our infrastructure reserve account, which is then used for capital purchases, funding things like the roof replacements and the HVAC replacements. And that's what happens each year after that.
Option 2. Sorry, I should give
No,
a
it's all right.
countdown here.
So option 2, the information really starts on pages 9 through 11. At the bottom of page 9, spanning through page 11. Way I would consolidate my explanation of this is really, we were trying to really make sure that we communicated and explained where some of the challenges that we have from a staffing perspective are coming from as it pertains to demands, additional, different events that may be foreseen or unforeseen, the maintenance costs associated with maintaining operations, but also when you add facilities, but then you don't add staff, how do you maintain those facilities into the future? And increases in labor requirements to include outside regulatory requirements. As a municipal government, Sarah can probably speak to this ad nauseum, but for elections, for example, there's constantly evolving added regulations and obligations from an accounting perspective. It's very similar. And reporting to the federal government or reporting to different entities, which, when those new obligations come up, individually, they don't seem like much, but in the aggregate over time, especially, and when you've got the same staff who maybe, as time goes on, we have technology requirements and how to maintain and how to address those requirements. And, that requires training staff to do new things. And there has to be a trade-off. There's an opportunity cost for any time they're doing something else that gets pushed as far as a regulatory. So it was really just trying to put an overview of kind of the increasing demands and obligations that we've seen as staff. And to point to, it's one of the reasons why we asked public administration associates to come in and evaluate specifically the administration department and give us their viewpoint on, is our staffing adequate or appropriate given the amount of labor and work that we have to do. And among those recommendations with their report is on the referendum page. Among their recommendations was to add staff to the administration department. Again, Public Works was something organically that we identified as something that was in the needs and interests of the community, because we know that Public Works is always working hard and never able to fulfill all their obligations to the community.
Questions and comments? Yes, ma'am.
I fully support, keeping up the public works. They've done a hell of a time keeping up with the storm damage. And I also support an extra administrative person, but I understand the consultant recommended separating out the 3 hats that can't know where's, and not have our zoning administrator deciding which codes to enforce, and the village administrator deciding how those are enforced, and then the police chief deciding who gets enforced upon. And that's all one person. If we approve that extra person, can we separate out those tasks? And Tanner would have less of that onerous responsibility, and there'd be more separation of state, so to speak.
So Maureen, I have asked Mark if he'd be interested to be our zoning administrator in the past.
We are working on a zoning code rewrite, if you will. And you're right, there was a recommendation in the report to separate out Tanner's duties. With respect to the zoning, I think we're addressing it by trying to simplify the zoning code and work with Mark more clearly. And we did ask and answer the question about separating out the police duties from the village administrator, and we're not pursuing that.
Why did you decide not to?
Candidly, because Tanner is important to us, and I asked Tanner specifically at the request of the board. That's not something Tanner wanted to pursue, nor do I.
Other questions and comments about option 2?
There's a summary of each of the 3 options on the last 2 pages of the report that people want, just a brief synopsis.
Lastly, I think I'd be remiss in stating, during my time as president, it seems like there's been an inordinate amount of requests for data, specifically around policing. And part of the answer for an additional admin support is to address that. There was also the topic that a lot of the data was not, as I understand it, being collected at all prior to Tanner's time. And it's being collected now. And that's an additional burden on staff. So I think adding an admin support to be able to provide the data that is being requested certainly has value.
Are there questions in the chat? I see none right now, but now's your chance. I'll get to you in a second, sir. Sorry, I didn't close the physical room down appropriately. I'll get back to you. Any hands raised?
I see none.
Okay. You got a little bit of time, Zoomers. I'll get to another question in the room here. Yes, sir.
And I just wanted, so I know Kevin is correct that there has been additional requests for data. I think that goes nation and worldwide now, but also specifically police data. There's a reason why that's been an uptake in the last few years. I think most people in this room know why. So.
Why is that? I don't know why. I mean,
Because of number one, option number three, I would say there, people want to know, do we need 2 more police? And how do you find out whether you were going to become the highest tax community in all of Wisconsin without giving that data?
I support the collection of data.
Thank you.
There was another question or comment that you get taken care of. Anyone else in the Zoom, Nick?
Not that I see, no.
We'll bounce on to option 3, and we're now just 1 minute behind.
All right, so between pages 11 and 15, and then again, thank you for pointing that out, Chris, on page 17, there's this condensed version. The report goes into essentially what I'll say is why I, as chief of police, am recommending the village to add 2 police officers. And then also why we are recommending from a public safety, from a fire perspective, we're seeking to improve the compensation and incentives for our fire paid on call and intern staff members. From, you know, from the police side, I've seen, we're having challenges under our current staffing. You know, candidly, working alone as a police officer in 2024 in a metropolitan area is difficult and stressful. Policing is already a very stressful job. And in the past 4 years, it's become even more so. That's my perspective. I know many people may not agree with me, but as the chief of police, I have to attend to that and my concerns associated with that. We are seeing a increased risk to our police officers over time. We have the same proactivity levels today as we did back in 2018. We're making the same amount of traffic stops as we did back in 2018. So we're not making more contacts from a traffic stop perspective as a police department. But what we have seen is we're having a significant more amount of repeat offenders who we come in contact with. We have a significant amount more of people fleeing from us as police officers, and it's a more general dangerous environment, which is one of the reasons why, you know, we've been sharing police statistics. I understand my hope in sharing the statistics with the community is not to make residents afraid that crime is rising, but the environment is different. And I just want to highlight that and point that out because it means something to the officers who work for the community because it immediately impacts their feelings of safety and their ability to do their jobs effectively. Fortunately, village residents rarely become victims of crime. And I personally attribute that to our long history since I was here back since 2012 of our proactive approach to how we police. You know, we keep an element of deterrence around the community, and that prevents people from acting irresponsibly, criminally, and recklessly in our community. And so with those changing environmental trends that I see, and we've posted the data on the website as well. under frequently asked questions about police on the referendum page. So I encourage everyone to go look at it and make your own assertions from that. You know, we are also seeing Madison grow around us. And so as we see Madison grow around us and housing developments go up around the community, I want to make sure that the police department is well positioned and ready for the challenges that we're already seeing and we can reasonably expect are going to get even more challenging for our officers. Every single one of your police officers, none of them want to work alone. They all want to work with somebody else at any given time. Now, we're not, and this recommendation to add 2 police officers, I just want to be clear, isn't going to get us 2 officers on duty 100% of the time. It will get us twice as much as we currently are able to staff because of our part-time staff, but it's not going to get us all the time. You know, we have to balance fiscal responsibility with the needs of the community. I think this is the right answer right now, and that's what I'm recommending. I want to let Chris speak to the recommendation for fire EMS compensation and incentives, because it would be unfair for me to take the microphone.
Sure. My name is Chris Lyon, the fire chief here in the village. We have what's known as a combination fire department. We have a combination of some paid full-time staff and some what we call paid on-call individuals, formerly known as volunteers. But we haven't had a true volunteer fire service in the community for going on 13 years. Our volunteers do receive some compensation for the time that they put in here at the firehouse when they're on call, when they're doing training, and when they are responding to incidents. So the 77,000 that was earmarked in my proposal to the village board and in hopes for the referendum would be to better compensate our paid on call members, because just like the staffing conversation that happened earlier, we are competing for a lot of the same staff. Volunteerism in the fire and EMS services is down nationwide and statewide and countywide. And so we're all kind of vying for the same firefighters and EMTs. And in order to retain the ones that we have and hopefully incentivize new members of the department, we're looking to increase what their compensation looks like. In addition to the compensation for our paid on call staff, we're also looking for a little bit of additional compensation to help fund our student internship program. We currently have 4 paid full-time people. We have 6 interns who live here at the firehouse while they're taking their associate's degree at MATC. And we are the only organization in Dane County that has an internship program that doesn't pay for the tuition in full for those students. And so in order to keep up with those other departments and to make it a more marketable environment for recruiting, those were my 2 asks. So looking for better compensation for the paid on call staff and to help provide better educational reimbursement for our interns.
Chris, can you just
you give us a perspective on what a paid on call staff makes versus what you're asking for?
Sure. Yeah. So in the document, there's graphs and all that kind of stuff. We currently reimburse our paid on call staff per shift, per time that they respond to an emergency, and for every training that they are involved in, which equates to about $2.50 per hour. And so in order to kind of keep up with the going rate within the Dane County, we would be looking to go to anywhere between $5 and $8 per hour. Still not quite minimum wage, but it puts us in line with the other communities within Dane County.
What's tuition at, do you know?
Total tuition for one student for an associate's degree is $13,000 roughly. We currently budget for $1,000 per semester. So we currently budget for $2,000 a year for 6 students. So if you do the math, we get 2,000 times 6, we got 12,000 currently budgeted for our students. We would just be looking to double that to cover tuition completely.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do they have a commitment after they're done to stay at the department for a while? Like, as part of the, I know they're getting the residents, they live here, so I'm assuming they don't pay for that.
Correct.
But after they're.
We don't really have a carrot to dangle on a stick at the end of the internship. So because our full-time staff are command level positions, so the fire chief and 3 assistant fire chiefs, new students who are recent graduates don't have necessarily the acumen fulfilling those roles. And so we don't have full-time firefighter EMT positions available to them upon graduation, unfortunately. We do see a lot of our students, close to half of our students stay on as a paid on call member if they're living in the area, but they do not have full-time job opportunities here.
And did anyone respond community-wide to the request for a volunteer firefighter in the newsletter?
We have not seen any additional community members step up to volunteer.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have 2 questions. Do you include that tuition as part of their compensation? Is that considered part of their salary?
It is not.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh,
People are in the back of the room. I want to make sure.
So the question was, is the tuition reimbursement part of the compensation package that they receive? And the answer is no.
And then also the graph you have with the paid on call compensation, unfortunately. Why do you use a different set of communities when you do the graph on page 9? Why not the same communities when they're evaluating compensation?
Yeah, so the question is, why is the fire department using a different set of data or different communities that we compare ourselves to in the charts within the document? And that's because each department, each fire EMS department in the county is structured a little bit differently. And so I was trying to compare ourselves to other departments that have some full-time staff, some paid on call staff, and some intern staff as well. And most communities in Dane County do not have the structure that we do. Well, I don't want to say that. Most have a similar structure to what we do, but we can't compare ourselves to necessarily the city of Madison because they are 100% paid full-time staff members through and through. And so I used data that was available to the state Fire Chiefs Association and the state or the county's emergency management department to compare as closely as possible to communities that have similar fire.
Shouldn't that also be for current wages then, for the same reasons?
Question, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
So the question is, should we not then use those communities for the wage comparison and for the full-time staff? And not all of those departments selected have 100% paid full-time positions. And so we're not able to, again, we can't compare apples to apples because it just doesn't exist, unfortunately. So we try to do the best we could with community size, fire department size, and the way that the fire department is set up.
Yes, ma'am.
Are the other communities that we're comparing with who for internships, are they providing housing?
They are, yes. So there are currently, the question was, are the other communities we're comparing with providing housing to the internship program? And the answer is yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Something I read about the police recruitment was that it would be nice to be able to fund going to school, much like Chris is talking about for the fire department. Is that not something that we've considered if the attrition is what it is, and that would theoretically, we'd have a feeder into our department where there are positions, unlike what Chris was saying about our fire department, respectfully, we may not have a spot to put them to make our investment worth it and solve 2 problems instead of hiring 2 full-time positions that have the same attrition issues.
So I'm not opposed at all to, so again, I came here being recruited out of MATC and we've been successful at that model in the past when the market was a little bit differently. Sergeant Sugden has been with our police department for 27 years or so. His son was looking for work, wanted to come to Maple Bluff, but we weren't able to sponsor him through the academy. So he actually ended up getting a job with Middleton, and he's just making his way through the academy now. So I'm very much in support of doing that. I don't think it alleviates our need for additional officers necessarily. What was occurring within Maple Bluff Police Department before about 4 years ago, was our officers' wages from when they got here, they would top out of their wage rate at 5 years. So what we would see is we would see officers come into Maple Bluff in the police department, hit their 5 years and then leave. And what I've been trying to do with the negotiations with the union is take that, as opposed to just skyrocketing up and then going flat, is turn that bell curve a little bit more, put a little bit more curvature in it. So we're able to retain officers out past that 5-year mark, hopefully out more towards a 12-year mark, and we get more seasoned, experienced officers to serve the community. There's a number of different philosophies and kind of things that people want to achieve from a leadership perspective and how they structure those. I personally think that the village is well served having police officers who are familiar with the job, have investigative experience, familiar with the community, like the pace of the work here, which is self-driven versus being pushed to calls. I think from my perspective, it breeds the opportunity for really good culture within the department. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I just, yeah, no, I support it.
And to that point, in my follow-up, simply our bocce funds, and I'm throwing this out there. I recognize that I'm sure they're earmarked for certain things, but when we had such a successful increase, are there ways of capturing some of that for sponsoring MATC education or additional training or things that will retain our staff that we're supposedly losing?
We got really far without an acronym, but I think we hit the bocce.
It's a word.
It's not an acronym.
It's a word.
It's how you sport.
It is bocce.
It is actually bocce?
The village has a fundraising tournament every year.
Maxie.
You know, we're actively looking for creative ways to support our officers. We're in the process of standing up a 501c3 to give residents an opportunity to support the police officers. Grants to put someone through the academy is well within the bounds of that, and I think that would be a really good vehicle for something like that. It takes time to get it up and running.
In the blue in the back.
Yes.
I do support the pay equity and the parity and all of that, but I'm wondering if there's some ways to better organize things like the fire department. I understand we're gonna have 2 chief openings, and there's an opportunity to create some lower level positions, to create sort of a career track there instead of having 1 chief and 3 assistant chiefs. Create a lower, full-time paid position there that would be able to create some upward mobility. And I'm also, I understand from the data that we haven't had structured fire here in 20 years, and most of our fire service consists of EMS conveyances. And most of those are mutual aid conveyances. So we do a lot of outside work with both our departments here. So I would look at some other ways of organizing as well as bringing up the parity and stuff to try to reduce costs. For instance, we need a medical director, I understand. And UW offers a consortium of medical directors, of doctors who work as medical directors. Is there a way to pay $10,000 for a medical director from a consortium and add that pool of people to choose from? We've got Michael Lynn or Kim here in the village who's willing to do that, and he works with UW. There's things like that. And how about the way we pay for our ambulance? We got a new ambulance back here after spending 5 years and multiple discussions getting rid of the ambulance service historically because it didn't pay to have it in the village, because we have very few ambulance conveyances here.
I'm sorry, good ideas all, and we'll have a chance to talk more. We're getting to the end time, and I know there were a few more hands up, so I wanted to make sure we got them. Yes, sir.
I can definitely understand why police officers want to have one officer on duty, but I'm curious, how often are we running into situations where basically we need one police officer on duty?
Yeah, so how do we define need, right? Like, so, right now, for example, we're fortunate to be embedded right in the north side of the city of Madison. And when our officers are on a traffic stop, for example, where maybe they see indicators of heightened level of potential for risk, they can notify dispatch, and dispatch will get a city of Madison, if a city of Madison car is available, they will dispatch them to come back up our officer. Right? Madison, given their staffing levels, it isn't infrequent that they go to emergency response calls only, so that isn't always available. Also, there's a time delay there associated with making that traffic stop. And I bring up traffic stops because 1/3 of our contacts are traffic stops, right? 1/3 of all of our calls for service are traffic stops. We're a traffic-oriented, patrol-oriented police department. And that's where we most frequently encounter some of those more high-risk situations. So it can vary, and a lot of times it will depend on that officer's comfortability. There's also a component of when an officer makes a traffic stop, they have to be careful not to extend that traffic stop too long, because then it could be perceived as they're violating someone's rights. If they're waiting for 10 minutes on a traffic stop for somebody, that makes people frustrated, right? Regardless of who's in the driver's seat. Some of the things that we've seen, I fielded calls and concerns regarding alarm calls in the village, right? So number of different residents have alarms in their homes. If one of our officers, we get a call about a burglar alarm in your house, our officer will show up. Let's say it's 12 o'clock at night. That officer is going to have to make a subjective determination at that time to determine what's the safe course of action. So I was in the Marine Corps for 20 years. I served as a police officer since 2012. Different officers have different comfort levels, but I'll tell you, it's never a wise decision to try to go into and clear a building by yourself. So you need to wait for backup in order to safely address that concern. We have had residents who've reached out to me directly and expressed significant concern about that because of the fear that they had as a byproduct of having to wait. I wouldn't say that happens frequently, but it happens occasionally.
Do you know how often, I just ballpark, like how often officers are essentially calling for backup or assistance?
Every night, multiple times a night.
Okay, so it's a very frequent occurrence.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we need 2 officers, new positions, if we cover the 7 PM to 7 AM shift with 2, do we still need those 2 positions or can we get by with 1? That's the highest risk time period.
Well, so highest risk time period, you could debate what the best timing to place someone is. I would advocate for something more along the lines of, a little bit earlier in the evening than 7 p. and bringing them off a little bit earlier too, because that 4 AM time frame, although things can happen, of course, at any time of the day, it's just less frequent calls for service during that time. So other like Madison units are more likely to be available during that time too.
So are you able to cover those shifts with a current load, or do you need 2 officers to do that, or could you do that with 1?
So right now, what we have is we have enough full-time officers to cover all shifts with 1 officer. And then essentially our part-time officers are able to fill in. One of the challenges we have with relying on our part-time officers for 2 officer coverage is their availability varies, right? So, and there's a very small pool of part-time officers to recruit from and who are doing the work to begin with. We're one of a very few agencies who even employ part-time officers to begin with. So there's a very small pool of individuals who do the work. So it's inconsistent when we get 2 officer coverage. Our part-time officers, though, play a really integral role. We have a former chief of police on our part-time roles. We have a couple former detectives from the city of Madison, former sergeant from the city of Madison. We can pull in talent from our part-time cadre that can help you force multipliers from a training perspective, from an investigations perspective. So there's a lot of value added, is what I'm saying. But what we don't get is we don't get the predictability of making sure that we have 2 officers on duty at a consistent basis. So to get to your question, 2 officers would get us approximately 67% of every given day 2 officer coverage, 67% of that day. 1 additional officer would get us about 50% coverage of any given day.
We have, I know 2 more hands were raised in the room here. I'm gonna say, we're depending on your mode of measuring, we're either 4 minutes behind or 34 minutes behind. So if you have to leave, no offense taken. But with that, if with your final questions or comments, if you can keep them brief if possible, and the responses as well, we appreciate it. Yeah, right there in gray.
So I have a concern with where we allocate our policing services, you know, we have. A little over a block of Sherman, where we have both sides of it, and then a few more blocks where we have half of it. And I've attended meetings in the past where board members have asked you, Tanner, you know, like, what's your strategy, or how do you get directive on where all our officers should patrol? And at that time, you stated that you left it up 100% to the discretion, you did not give direction. I'm just wondering if you still, you have a strategy now. Should we be using, you know, all of our policing resources to be on Sherman Avenue patrolling versus within the village of Maple Bluff? Can you just tell me what your strategy is? And if you don't have one, would you consider developing one so we know, you know, what that is?
Yeah, I mean, so we have policing strategies and we have priorities. And we have those outlined in a document that we created this year. When I say I don't have a directive to officers that they'll patrol on North Sherman Avenue from this time to that time, it's because, one, I'm not a huge fan of micromanagement to begin with. Secondly, I'm the chief. I have an administration sergeant and an operations sergeant who have their priorities to pay attention to those things. It would be inappropriate for me to go to the office and be like, this is when you're going to, I think it would be inappropriate, maybe you disagree, to go and say, this is when you're going to patrol in these areas, unless we had data-driven purposes to do so. And I don't have that. I don't have a reasonable justification to say that you will patrol this, but I will say a vast majority of the traffic comes through our community on North Sherman Avenue. The vast majority of people who come through, who are in our community on any given day are not residents, but they come through on North Sherman. And a lot of our traffic activity is focused on North Sherman for that very reason. And our officers do that intuitively. We have, not only do we have that directive, that's the policies and procedures, we have the operational strategy and priorities that give the guidance and what my intent, so that they can choose, they can make good decisions and prioritize how to address the challenges as they see fit on a daily basis. And they're the ones who are there at any given moment and know what the environment is in order for them to properly.
The question is, what percentage of our resources we use for Sherman versus within our village, and how would any of us have any understanding of what that is? That's the question, and you're not answering the question. And so, like, how do we have 90% of our patrolling time on Sherman and 10% within the rest? Is it 50-50? Is it 10% there and 90% of the village? That's
well, North Sherman Avenue is the village of Maple Bluff. And I just want to be clear about that, because there have been people who've advocated for.
My question is, what percent of our resources for our police are we using to patrol one block that we have both sides of, and 5 blocks that we have half of, versus within Maple Bluff? My concern is we want to build up this police force and be like the Rosendale of Madison. And no, you laugh, but
I'm laughing because I've heard people refer to them that they want us to be the Rosendale of it, and I don't agree with that approach personally.
But you specifically, do we have any understanding that we are currently at 90% of patrolling is on Sherman, 10% on Sherman?
I don't have a percentage for you, but I would say the vast majority of our traffic interactions occur based upon activity our officers see on North Sherman Avenue.
And then there was a question about how do you coordinate.
One more question.
There was a question about how do you coordinate with Madison. Your response was very tactful about what the incident, but the streets we Sherman, we share with Madison. Do you have any coordination with the leadership of Madison Police to understand, are they patrolling half of that? Or, you know, equally with us, or do we have to carry the load for those policing that, and Madison doesn't? And then the rest of Sherman is much longer than what we have. Are we policing Sherman way higher in relationship to how Madison polices Sherman? So that's the spirit of my understanding is how do we police Sherman relative to the rest of Madison and Sherman itself? And are we in fact the most details?
Well, I would agree with your assertion that We are a proactive police department, and the vast majority of the way we approach policing is through traffic contacts primarily, right? So they make up about 1/3 of our contacts. I don't know what Madison's statistics are, but I do know that from a comparative perspective, I believe that we are much more proactive than the city of Madison in the way that we police to include patrol operations.
Already, without two more.
So is there a question?
We're gonna move on.
New question.
You had a question or comment?
Yeah, comment, and I'm actually here. But the timing is just about right. As a proxy for Patrick Brown, who called me just a little while before this meeting. For those of you who don't know him, he's a former trustee of the village. And also, a hotshot data analyst. And he, some time ago, for the year of 2023, made an open record request from Dane County. Basically, raw data about calls in Dane County, out of which the overall police departments were called. And he, right before I walked into this room, I'm not a hotshot data analyst, handed me 3 maps for anybody who has questions regarding where most of our activity is going. And said that I should leave them on the table for anybody who wants to look, but the black bars indicate outside of the line of Maple Bluff where our activity takes place, and there's dots that coordinate with those on the map that were geotagged. And what I understand in the April 8th committee meeting that I saw some of this data, the gray is, and then there's 2 different colors, gray for the edge, which would really be like right around, Sherman adjacent. And then another color gray indicates activity within the edge.
Certainly welcome a copy of those, and if you want to leave them in the back for other people to view, that's.
Yeah, I would leave, again, he called me right before I got here, and I can't speak to this data, but I know he's been working on it for a long time, and I know he made it available to both the board and the police committee in early April. And I'm not sure that it's been done, that's fair.
Fair enough. Well, make sure if you have a copy to leave it in the back of the room, and then serve here after that. Yes.
Yeah, is there a place to access the actual of expenses and revenues for the village rather than just sort of the budget overview that we have here? Just another handful of questions specific to things like debt service or miscellaneous revenue, what's included in that, just out of curiosity, is specific to that, where the lease payments from the country club end up living in the village. And so I took a look at the Florida bills financials, which is a more comprehensive package of what we can find online in that more detail. So I'm just curious if there's a way to access that.
I'll have the 2024 detailed budget posted to the referendum page.
Cool. Gary, do you have a comment or question?
My name's Dennis Gold, I need to be the judge here, so I'm looking at. Terry, can you explain, the 66% of officer time, you said 1/3 is traffic stop. When I first started, traffic, a court session would be about this many people per night. When I ended, the last couple of years, we typically had 1 or 2 people show up for court. Tickets have been way down. Yet I understand that the officers are still making traffic stops. So can you explain what the difference, if you can, and then the time they're spending beyond making traffic stops, is they're spending their time on. If there's other, I'm looking at page 11 of your report, and it seems like there's other activities they're involved in. Is that a higher crime rate? That would be totally fine. Can you explain that for?
Yeah, so thank you, Judge, appreciate it. Hope retirement's suiting you well. So our municipal court doesn't have a whole lot of activity, and it has atrophied over the years. I think that I may be a contributing factor to that in some regards, in that unlike the Rosendale the Rosendale approach, where everyone gets a citation and everyone has to show up for court as a byproduct or just pay the ticket. I don't personally see citing everybody and not being compromising in traffic citations as being something that is long-term advantageous for community relations, nor necessarily public safety outcomes. When an officer has a traffic stop, there's a number of things that they have to think about, but among them are, the interactions and the interactions they have with the driver and the observations that they have as part of their investigation. So where an officer might pull someone over for speeding 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, and they run that individual's plate, look at who the registered owner is and see what their driving history is. They know that before they walk up to the vehicle. Then they have an interaction with that driver, and sometimes that goes in a couple different directions, right? It can be a very positive and trust building type of a relationship. And other times it can be just straight contentious. Officers have the discretion at that point on how to try to achieve the long-term public safety outcome. So if you can make what I call an educational contact with a driver, and you can leave it on a positive note, meaning a verbal warning or a written warning versus giving them a citation, I encourage my officers to do so. I don't think that police do themselves on a broad spectrum any service by making themselves the enemy of the public. Even if I get pulled over, my heart jumps into my throat. It's not a pleasant feeling. It's just a natural human anxiety response. And that's an impactful experience, especially for our village residents. So I think about this from a perspective of our community, in that it isn't lost on me that out of 101 arrests that we made last year, none of them were village residents. And a vast majority of our traffic contacts that we make are not of village residents. So, regardless of who we're making contact with, though, we want to be making sure that we're treating people fairly and professionally. I don't think that, and the long-term outcome that we want to achieve is safer streets. And so if you can achieve that through a proactive contact with a warning, great. And so, over time, I think, Judge, what you've seen is our officers, when they walk up to that vehicle and they make contact and everything's friendly and it seems like an educational contact and a written warning or a verbal warning can achieve those long-term outcomes, they choose to do that. And conversely, what that does is it opens up their time. And as they do more in-depth investigations, we are seeing a more larger proportion of their contacts that they are making, even though they're making the same number of traffic stops as they had in the past. They're encountering people who are repeat offenders, are wanted, have warrants, or on probation or parole, and they're violating those conditions. It's not infrequent at this point. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, yes.
So just, this is referring back to one of the first questions that was asked tonight, which was about sustainability, a long-term plan. Referendums are doing kind of short-term work, it feels like, in the village. The survey had a ranking question, for example, that asked people to say, what are your priorities? It seems like there needs to be a bigger discussion about where priorities are for the community, rather than y'all coming to us and saying, how do you want to prioritize real quick before this referendum? Kevin, you said that there was a long-term plan at the beginning, right? That was your answer to that gentleman's question. Is that available for people to see so that we can assess that in light of the referendum? Is that possible for everybody to know what you're talking about long-term?
I don't have a long-term plan. But I would say, that our trustee meetings are monthly and, anyone can attend them. So what we've been doing on a monthly basis shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And I know it's not a surprise to a lot of you because some of you call in and some of you attend. In terms of long-term strategy, long-term for me is the next 5 years, which is what this will address. Unfortunately, we went to a referendum in 2020 and, we're doing it again in 2024. That doesn't feel good, I think, to any of us. And, none of these questions here are one that we want to ask. And there are also questions that we've worked at again since March 1 and 4 to address. And so, I think there's a level of unhappiness among all of us. But I wouldn't say, and I wouldn't characterize this in any way as, this is being foisted on you and, here you go. It shouldn't be a surprise to any of us.
I don't think that that's what I'd be buying, just to be clear, I just want to know what a strategic plan looks like from April Bluff long term, because I think that actually can help guide decisions like this, so that we're prepared a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's.
And community first, wherever possible as well.
Anyone else in the room care to make a comment? Yes, ma'am.
Hopefully this will be a really quick one. It looks like in the summary at the very end, all of the example numbers are based on fair market values versus assessed values. And I want confirmation on that. And secondly, if that is the case, why not use the assessed values since we just did an assessment 2 years ago?
So we did a revaluation in 2020, when the same time that we did the referendum, which wasn't ideal for predicting that, but because when you look at neighboring municipalities like the city of Madison, city of Monona, they do revaluations every year, and so their fair market value and their assessed values are the same. Where in Maple Bluff, there is a discrepancy. So when you get into the realm of trying to compare us to other municipalities, if we use the fair market value instead of the assessed value, that's a more apples to apples if we're gonna talk that way.
So it would be based on the fair market value?
Yes.
This increase.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
In some communities, they're doing a sharing between police and fire staffing. Is that anything you picked around here?
So I can answer that from a historical perspective. So back in 2009, the then police chief, road administrator, myself, and the then fire chief, and a number of staff visited the only other village in the state of Wisconsin, which is Schwabenheim, which happens to also be the state's largest village, as a suburb of the Green Bay metropolitan area. And they're the only community that currently uses that staffing model. And for us to have that staffing model implemented, we would have needed to add a minimum of 7 full-time staff members just to achieve the staffing levels that would be required to have people who are certified police officers, firefighters, EMTs, or paramedics, and be on a 24-hour or a 12-hour staffing rotation. And so for us to go to that currently would be even more financially, I guess it wouldn't be advantageous for us at this time.
Okay, and counterintuitive.
Yeah, so while it's a good idea to be able to have emergency responders who kind of are a jack of all trades and do a little bit of everything, in order to achieve 24-hour coverage, we would have to add a lot more staff.
Or do you mean share between villages? Or
No, I just meant here, if you have a police officer that needs backup and you have a firefighter who's got a call, so you can use that person as your backup.
There's a number of like operational nuances that become, I mean, some communities choose to do it. But it can get a little bit complicated from, a response standpoint, and what capacity are you acting right now, and under what legal authorities, and it's not impossible, but it is a different approach.
It seemed like an interesting concept, but I should understand the practicality of it. I did want to say one other thing. I do understand now the difference in that the revaluation is the key to the gradually increasing revenue, that because we only do a revaluation periodically, whereas Madison does it every year. So what you were saying, it was true unless we do a revaluation, then you're allowed to bring your revenue up. And how much did it cost us to do a revaluation?
I think when we did it in 2020, it was about $32,000.
Could you do a system where you do a revaluation along the Madison model, where you take comparable sales year over year and apply that same metric to every area?
So the city of Madison has like their own assessor department, so they probably have a staff of 5 to 10 people that's all they do all day long is analyze those analytics, and we just don't have the staff to do that.
I just want to make one more point. Despite the fact that I'm asking you questions that I feel like I'm sort of needling you a little bit, I think it's inevitable that we have to do something to allow you more money. My questions are not intended to say, no, we can't do this. I just wanted to make that clear to this group that I think we do need to get a referendum passed.
Nick, I think there was one comment in the chat, and I think it was this question as well as a comment. Where does this leave retired villagers on a fixed income? Thanks. It had a question mark, but I think it was more of a comment than a question. Any other final people in the Zoom who have any final questions or comments? Yes. For my part, I'm just going to continue to encourage you to take the survey. If you haven't taken it, you can point your phone at this QR code and take it right now. Otherwise, at your leisure, please do respond to it. It's the most statistical way we have of getting your input. I appreciate that. And we'll take them here tonight, absolutely.
Just give them the mark.
Yeah. And Kevin, do you have any final comments?
No, thank you. All good questions, and they're questions that need to be asked. I'm sure we're gonna have another format, another forum. What's our next opportunity?
Well, tomorrow is the village board meeting and we're gonna be discussing timelines. There will have to be a few special village board meetings scheduled to look at the survey results and continue to develop a referendum question.
And there was a number of questions posed to Tanner on police matters that got posted to the web. There were a number of questions that got sent to Sarah as well. That's a fine format. I'm sure we're gonna have follow up. I would say again on these topics, we've been talking about them since March, and we could keep talking about them well past November. So I'm happy we have a target date of November 5th for the referendum. And we were back and forth with all these questions, and that's what we came up with. So that's where we're at.
Sir, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, excuse me. Not that I'm proposing this, but and maybe I missed it somehow, but has it been reviewed as part of this analysis? Having services provided by another municipality, either police or fire, and I don't know whether those are options or not.
We as a board did not explore that. No,
I'm sorry.
we did not. As board of trustees, we did not explore that option.
I did reach out to the Dane County Sheriff's Office just so I would understand what the price point is if the village were to want to contract deputies, right? Dane County deputies to provide police services. And the cost per officer is more than what we're looking at to add the officers in this proposal. But as far as complete replacement of the department, I can't answer that question.
Yeah. Any information on fire? Which I think is the other.
And I think that Short Hills is probably the most likely kind of.
That would be the most recent community that's reached out to the city of Madison. The most viable option for the village for fire service, if we were to not provide the service, would be probably the city of Madison. In the past, we've had discussions about utilizing their services and what that would cost. Contract negotiations were anywhere between just under to substantially over what we're currently paying for our own fire.
I think a good observation would be our experience with Ryan Brothers versus having EMS, and we paid for a service that we felt was inferior and chose to do that internally. So I'm going to imagine that's what would happen to us if we explored the opportunity to hire police or fire outside of third party.
Thank you all. Oh, so
I
my
just want
final,
to make sure we thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you all for coming.
And for meeting with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I can speak to the, so,